All right, everyone, get ready because today we are going deep on self-care routines.
Oh, yeah.
We hear self-care all the time, but do we really know what it means? I mean, do we have a solid routine down?
That's what we are here to figure out.
Right, and that's where this in-depth guide comes in.
You bet.
I'm ready to see what really makes a self-care routine tick, you know?
Yeah.
And maybe we'll find some surprises along the way.
Definitely. The first thing that jumped out at me from this guide is how it kind of changes how we think about self-care.
Interesting.
It's not just about, treating yourself every now and then.
Like a spa day or something.
Yeah. It's
Well,
more like an investment.
in yourself.
Exactly. In your well-being.
Mhm.
It's about living a life that feels balanced and fulfilling.
That makes a lot of sense. And I have to admit, I do get caught up in that, treat yourself kind of thinking.
I think we all do.
But looking at this guide, it's clear that they're advocating for a more well-rounded and long-term approach.
Definitely.
They even break it down into 4 main areas:
Okay. What are they?
physical, mental, and emotional, social, and spiritual. So first up, let's tackle physical health. What stood out to you about that section?
Well, it's cool because they go beyond the typical eat your veggies and hit the gym advice.
Right.
They
Yeah.
go into the science behind why these things actually matter.
Oh, really? Give me an example.
Okay, so they cite a study where folks who exercise moderately, just 30 minutes each day, saw a big dip in stress hormones.
No way.
And get this, their sleep quality improved too.
Wow. So it's not just about squeezing into those genes, huh?
Nope.
It's about giving yourself the tools to deal with whatever life throws at you.
Exactly.
Now, let's talk mental and emotional well-being. This is where I personally feel like things get a little tricky, you know?
I get it.
What did the guide focus on there?
One thing that really stood out to me was the focus on mindfulness and gratitude. Those practices, like in our crazy busy world, it's so easy to get lost in our thoughts and to-dos.
Oh, yeah, tell me about it.
The guide makes the point that even just a few minutes of focused breathing or writing down what you're thankful for can have a huge impact on how you feel mentally.
I could see that. It's like hitting the pause button on the mental overload.
That's a great way to put it. And speaking of overload, the guide also talks about getting professional help.
Oh, you mean like therapy?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
It really emphasizes that therapy or counseling isn't something to be ashamed of.
It's more like taking care of yourself.
Exactly. It's a powerful form of self-care. Sometimes we need extra help to deal with life's challenges.
I agree. And I think some people still see therapy as like a negative thing.
Definitely.
So it's great that the guide addresses that directly. Okay, so we've covered the physical and mental emotional sides. Now, what about the social part of self-care?
Right?
I'll admit I could use some pointers in that department.
You and me both.
Mhm.
A lot of people struggle with that. But the guide, it kind of reframes what social self-care means.
How so?
It's not about being, the most popular person or having a calendar packed with social events.
It's not.
Nope. It's about focusing on the connections that really matter to you.
So quality over quantity.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's about spending your time with people who energize and lift you up. And it also emphasizes boundaries.
Boundaries.
Healthy boundaries, yeah.
Hmm.
It even tells this story about a woman who was always saying yes to everything.
Uh-oh.
She was exhausted all the time.
Yeah.
When she finally started setting some boundaries, guess what?
What happened?
She had more energy and could be more present in her relationships.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like when you say yes to something you don't want to do, you're saying no to something else.
That's deep.
And maybe that something else is even more important, like your own well-being.
Exactly. Boundaries aren't selfish. They're actually pretty healthy.
Agreed. Okay, ready for a curveball?
Hit me.
Spiritual self-care. Now, full disclosure,
Go.
I'm a pretty practical person, so when I hear spiritual, I get a little skeptical.
I understand.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people feel the way. But the guide's take on it is pretty down to earth.
Right.
Yeah, they define it as connecting with your inner self and
Yeah.
finding purpose.
Okay, that's not so bad.
Exactly. It's not about religion or anything like that. It's about finding meaning in your life.
Interesting. What kind of things do they suggest?
Well, they have a whole range of ideas, from
Yeah.
spending time in nature to volunteering, even just saying affirmations.
That's pretty diverse.
It's all about finding what speaks to you, what makes you feel connected to something bigger than yourself.
Like nurturing that part of you that wants to find meaning in life?
That's a great way to put it. And the guide suggests that this can lead to more resilience and peace.
Fascinating. Okay, so we've talked about all 4 areas the guide lays out.
Physical, mental, emotional, social, and spiritual.
Right. But how do we actually turn all of this into a routine? Where do we even start?
The guide has some great advice on creating a personalized self-care routine. And, the biggest thing is to start small.
Start small.
Yeah, you don't have to change your whole life overnight.
I think that's where a lot of people go wrong, They try to do too much too fast.
I know, right? It can be overwhelming.
And then they just give up.
Totally. So the guide recommends picking one or two small habits to focus on first.
Small habits.
Yeah. Like something as simple as a 10-minute walk each day or 5 minutes of gratitude journaling in the evening.
Okay, those are pretty manageable.
Exactly. Once you get the hang of those, you can add more.
It's like building momentum over time.
That's the idea.
Hmm.
Another crucial tip they have is to personalize your routine.
Make it your own.
Exactly. What works for one person might not work for another. You got to experiment and find what really clicks for you, what fits into your life.
It's about making self-care work for you, not the other way around.
You got it.
Yeah.
There's no right or wrong way to do it. The important thing is to find what makes you feel good and makes a real difference.
I love that. This is so much more practical and, well, doable than I expected.
Glad to hear it.
Okay, we've got starting small and personalizing it. What other wisdom does the guide have for us?
Well, it talks a lot about consistency. It's something we all struggle with.
Oh, yeah, big time.
But they recommend actually scheduling your self-care practices.
Like putting it on the calendar.
Just like any other important appointment. If it's not scheduled, it's easy to just, let it slide.
Clear, true.
And then they have this cool tip that I'd never thought of before.
What's that?
Track your progress.
Track it.
Yeah. It could be as simple as keeping a journal. To write down how you're feeling, what's working, what's not.
It's like turning self-care into an experiment.
That's a great way to look at it.
Yeah.
You're gathering data on what actually makes you feel better.
Data-driven self-care. I like it.
Yeah.
Okay, any other pearls of wisdom before I move on?
The last one is huge. Be flexible.
Flexible.
Yeah, life happens, right? There will be days when you just can't stick to your routine perfectly.
It's inevitable.
Totally. And that's okay. The point is to not let those little hiccups derail your whole self-care effort.
So it's all about progress over perfection.
Exactly. It's about giving yourself a little grace to adjust and go with the flow.
I love that. I gotta say, this is way more insightful than I expected. I'm already feeling inspired to shake up my own self-care routine.
Me too. How about you? What stood out to you the most so far? What really struck me was how the guide presents self-care as a journey, not a destination.
A journey.
It's not about reaching some perfect end goal. It's about showing up for yourself regularly.
And trying things out, seeing what sticks.
That's it. It's a journey of self-discovery.
But takes the pressure off, right? You don't have to be perfect at self-care.
Right. It's all about the process, the little steps you take to care for yourself each day.
I love that. Okay, this whole conversation has got me thinking.
What's on your mind?
If you can add just one self-care practice to your routine this week, what would it be?
Oh, that's a good one. Let me think about that. Actually, hold that thought. I want to hear what our listeners would choose to.
Yeah, great idea. Let's hear from our listeners. What about you? What's one thing you're going to focus on this week?
We'll be back in a bit to dive deeper into all of this and, well, to see what it all means for your self-care journey.
All right, sounds good. We'll be right back after a quick break. And we are back, diving deep into self-care routines. As we were talking about the different areas of self-care, it really hit me that it's not just about, pampering yourself.
It's way more than that.
It's like equipping yourself to handle the ups and downs of life.
It is. It's about building that resilience and inner strength. And speaking of tools, setting boundaries is one of the most powerful tools we have.
Definitely. We touched on boundaries earlier, and I think it's worth exploring a little more.
I agree.
It's something I personally wrestle with, and I'm sure a lot of our listeners can relate. That feeling of wanting to make everyone happy, but ending up feeling drained and resentful.
The guide has a really interesting perspective on boundaries.
What is it?
It says boundaries aren't just about saying no to others.
Okay.
They're also about saying yes to yourself, to what truly matters to you.
I like that. Can you break that down a bit more? I think that's a really important distinction.
Absolutely. It's like when you say yes to something you don't really want to do, you're saying no to something else.
Ooh.
You're saying no to your own needs, your time, your energy.
It's like we're always making choices even when we don't realize it.
Right.
And if we don't set those boundaries, we're letting other people make those choices for us.
Exactly. And that can make you feel overwhelmed, resentful, even burned out. The guide gives this example of a woman who was always volunteering for everything.
Oh, no.
She was spread so thin. And it wasn't until she started saying no to some things
Right.
that she realized how much she was neglecting herself.
It's hard to say no, though, isn't it? especially when it comes to helping people or being there for loved ones.
I know what you mean. The guide talks about that guilt we feel.
Hmm.
And it reframes it. It says, sometimes being compassionate means setting boundaries.
Compassionate to yourself,
And to others. It's about recognizing your limits.
that you can't do it all.
Right. You can't be everything to everyone, and that's okay.
So by setting those boundaries, we're actually able to be more present and genuine in the relationships that matter most.
It's a win-win.
Yeah.
And, this whole conversation about boundaries brings up another big part of self-care that I think the guide hints at throughout.
What's that?
Self-compassion.
Ah, yes. Self-compassion.
That-
We could all use a little more of that.
Especially these days, right?
Yeah,
It's so easy to compare ourselves to others and strive for perfection.
all the time. So how does the guide talk about self-compassion?
It doesn't have a specific section on it, but it's woven into the whole philosophy.
Okay.
It's about treating yourself with the same kindness you'd show a good friend.
I think a lot of us are way harder on ourselves than we would ever be on someone else.
Totally. We set these crazy high standards and then beat ourselves up when we don't meet them.
Ugh, it's the worst.
The guide, it encourages us to change that negative self-talk,
Those inner critics.
to replace it with positive, encouraging thoughts. Yeah. Like it suggests asking yourself, would I say this to a friend?
That's a good one. It helps you see things from a different perspective.
And quiet those harsh voices in your head.
Mm.
What's really cool is that studies show self-compassion actually helps us be more resilient, more motivated, and just happier overall.
So it's not just about feeling good in the moment.
It sets us up for success and happiness in the long run.
It all goes back to self-care as an investment, doesn't it?
It does. When you invest in your well-being, it benefits everyone around you too.
It's like a ripple effect.
Exactly. Something else that really struck me about this guide is how it challenges the idea that self-care is selfish.
Right.
It actually frames it as an act of generosity. When you take care of yourself, you're better able to give to others.
You have more to offer.
More patience, more understanding, more joy. It's like filling your own cup first so you have something to pour from.
I love that analogy. And that brings us back to our question from earlier.
You remember?
If you could add just one self-care practice to your routine this week, what would it be? And why? Have you thought about it?
It's tough to pick just one. But for me, I think it would be starting each morning with a little gratitude journaling.
Gratitude journaling.
Yeah, like 5 minutes, just writing down what I'm thankful for. Even little things.
Okay.
I think it would help me start the day with a more positive outlook. What about you? What would you choose?
Honestly, I've been trying to get better at setting boundaries,
Good for you.
but the guilt still creeps in sometimes. So this week, I'm going to focus on saying no to at least one thing that doesn't feel right.
That's awesome. It's about honoring your needs and knowing it's okay to say no.
Exactly. This is a good reminder for our listeners, too. What's one self-care practice you could add to your routine this week?
Take a moment to think about it. We'd love to hear what you come up with.
And while you're thinking, we'll be right back to wrap up this deep dive and explore what it all means for your self-care journey.
We'll be back in a flash.
See you soon. Wow, I am feeling so inspired after that conversation.
We too. It's so easy to forget about taking care of ourselves.
Totally. But this deep dive has been like a wake-up call.
It really has. Self-care isn't selfish. It's crucial.
And what's really cool about this guide is that it explains the why behind it all.
Yeah, it's not just about surface level stuff.
Exactly. It's about creating a life that feels meaningful, a life that's aligned with what you believe in.
It's about building that inner strength, that resilience to handle anything.
As we've been talking, I keep thinking about how self-care is a journey.
Not a destination.
Right. There's no finish line. It's a constant process of learning and growing and changing.
And the guide really stresses that,
Mhm.
It encourages you to be curious, to try new things and see what works for you.
What works for one person might not work for another.
Exactly. We're all different.
It's like we're all scientists in our own little self-care labs.
I love that. Testing things out, seeing what makes us feel our best.
Yep. And it takes the pressure off, doesn't it? You don't have to be perfect at self-care.
Not at all. It's all about progress, not perfection.
And being kind to ourselves along the way.
Always. Another big takeaway for me is that self-care isn't a solo mission.
Right.
It's about connecting with people, setting those healthy boundaries, asking for help when you need it.
The guide actually mentions a study that found people with strong social connections tend to live longer, healthier lives.
It's true. Having those connections isn't just about feeling good, it's good for us physically and mentally.
It makes you realize that self-care is about more than just what you do for yourself. It's about who you surround yourself with.
It's about community.
And speaking of community, we'd love to hear from our listeners.
What are your favorite self-care practices? What works for you?
Let's share some ideas and inspire each other.
Absolutely.
So, as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with one final thought.
Okay, I'm listening.
Self-care is empowering.
I like that.
It's about taking charge of your well-being and making choices that nourish your mind, body, and soul.
It's about recognizing that you deserve to feel good, that taking care of yourself is an investment in becoming your best self.
Couldn't have said it better myself. So, everyone listening, keep exploring, keep experimenting, keep taking care of yourself.
Even small changes can make a big difference over time.
That's right. And until next time.
Keep diving deep.